He wasn't looking to be a hero. The single dad had come for feed and fence wire, nothing more. But what he found on the dusty wooden platform that day would unravel everything he thought he'd buried, and quietly rebuild a life he never expected to live again. This story will move you not with noise, but with the quiet power of love redemption and the miracles that begin with a single act of kindness. If stories like this speak to your heart, consider subscribing. It's how we keep bringing you real human hope, one unforgettable story at a time. Now let's begin. The dust hung low in the late summer air, clinging to boots and brows, settling into the worn creases of wooden bleachers that lined the auction yard. The town of Three Pines, population just under 1,000, was wrapping up its annual livestock auction, a tradition held more for nostalgia than profit. Kids still chased each other with sticks. Ranchers leaned against pickup trucks with coffee gone cold, and the occasional laughter stirred beneath the faded red and white banners that flapped gently in the wind. The auctioneer was wiping sweat from his neck when the engine roared. A battered 1988 Chevy truck backfired as it pulled onto the dirt lot. People turned, not because the truck was unfamiliar, but because Virgil Kane was behind the wheel, and everyone in Three Pines had a story about him. None of them ended happily. He parked crooked near the auction platform, the engine sputtering before it choked off. The door creaked open. A bottle clanked to the ground, half empty. Virgil stepped out, lean and hollow-eyed, stumbling slightly, as he made his way to the passenger side. Then he opened the door, and the world stopped. 3 boys, triplets, maybe 7 years old, emerged. They didn't speak. They didn't cry. They just clung to one another like roots to cracked earth. One held a tiny cloth rabbit. Another wore 1 sneaker and 1 boot. The youngest, smallest, had a Band-Aid across his eyebrow and kept looking up, as if still hoping someone would take him home after this strange errand. Virgil walked them to the edge of the auction platform. People watched, murmurs swelling and dying like waves. No one knew what was happening. Not yet. Then he climbed onto the wooden stage, turned to the crowd, and raised his hand, not steady, but not shaking either. It was the silence that made it terrifying. Even the kids had stopped playing. "I ain't here to sell livestock," he said hoarsely. "I'm here to do the last thing I still might do right." He gestured to the 3 boys. "They ain't mine by blood. I married their mama after their daddy left. She passed last year. Pneumonia. No health insurance, you know the story." He wiped his mouth. Someone coughed. Someone else whispered, "Oh God." "I tried. Lord knows I tried," Virgil continued. "I gave up drinking for a while, took jobs no man should have to take, tried raising them right. But I can't do it anymore. I'm tired, and I'm sick, and I'm not what they need." He stepped aside. The boys looked up at him, then at the crowd. "I'm not here to dump them. I'm here to beg," Virgil said, his voice breaking. "Someone here, someone better than me, take them in. Please." The smallest boy's lower lip trembled, but he still didn't cry. He just reached into his pocket and handed Virgil a crumpled picture stick figures, drawn with love and shaky crayons. A house, a dog, a man holding 3 boys' hands. Virgil stared at it. Then he pulled a small object from his pocket, a wooden carving of a feather worn smooth by years of being held and thumbed over. "I carved this for them last Christmas. That was my best day. That was the last good day I remember." He placed it gently on the platform beside the boys, then walked off the stage. No one moved. The wind stirred dust around the children's feet. Someone in the crowd sniffled. A woman clutched her purse tightly. A few hats were doffed, but no one stepped forward. Until one man did. Jesse Maddox, tall and quiet, a man who spoke like the earth seldom, but when he did, it mattered. He wore a denim shirt faded by sun, and time sleeves rolled up dirt beneath his nails. His boots were cracked at the heel. His face bore the lines of a storm that had passed through and stayed a while. Most of Three Pines remembered Jesse as the man who lost his boy. 3 years ago. Congenital heart defect. He hadn't spoken much since, but now he walked slowly, steadily toward the stage. He had no clipboard, no bidding paddle, just a small wooden box in his hand. He climbed onto the platform. Kneeling before the 3 boys, Jesse opened the box. Inside were 3 cloth patches, hand-stitched, frayed but clean. Each bore a single word: hope. Safe. Home. He looked each boy in the eye, steady, unflinching. "I don't have much," Jesse said, "but I've got a roof, some bread, and enough room for 3 small beds. If you're willing, you can come with me." The middle child reached out first, Caleb, though Jesse wouldn't know his name yet. He touched the patch labeled Hope. Then the eldest, Eli, nodded and stepped closer. Finally, Noah, the smallest, looked to where Virgil had walked off and then back at Jesse. He reached up, placing his small hand on Jesse's chest, right over his heart. And something in Jesse Maddox broke and mended in the same moment. The crowd exhaled. No applause, no cheers. But one old man took off his hat, stepped forward and murmured, "You didn't just take them in, son. You brought this town back to life." The road home was long and uneven, gravel clicking beneath the tires of Jesse Maddox's rusted pickup. In the back seat, 3 boys sat silently, shoulders barely touching, like 3 leaves blown into the same ditch by accident. No one spoke. Jesse kept his eyes on the road hand, steady on the wheel. His heart, though, felt anything but steady. He hadn't planned to bring anyone home that day. He'd gone to the auction for hay, just enough to last his old mule through the season. Instead, he drove away with 3 boys and a knot in his chest that hadn't let go since the smallest one placed his hand over Jesse's heart. They didn't ask questions, didn't cry, didn't even look out the windows. Only when the truck turned down the narrow dirt path leading to Jesse's weathered cabin did Caleb speak. Are there animals?" Jesse glanced at him through the rearview mirror. "One mule, named Gracie. She's temperamental, but she listens better than most people." Caleb nodded. The other 2 boys remained silent, but Jesse caught a flicker of curiosity in their eyes. The house came into view, a 2-bedroom cabin, built by Jesse's grandfather, nestled between 2 aging cottonwoods. The porch sagged slightly. Smoke trickled from the chimney. To anyone else, it looked like a forgotten place. To Jesse, it had always been just enough. He parked, stepped out, and opened the back door. The boys hesitated. "You don't have to be afraid," he said, voice low, almost gentle. "You can come in when you're ready." Caleb jumped down first, then Eli. Noah hung back. Jesse crouched beside him, not touching, just near enough. "I know it's new and scary, but you've got my word. No one's going to leave you behind here." Noah looked up wide-eyed and nodded once. Then he slid off the seat and followed his brothers up the steps. Inside the cabin was humble wood floors, scuffed by time, walls lined with old tools and books. A stove popped and hissed with firewood. Jesse's late wife had once decorated the place with soft blankets and sunflowers. After she passed, he packed those memories away in a box. Maybe someday, he thought now, he'd open that box again. "I'll show you where you'll sleep," Jesse said, guiding them down the narrow hall. The 2nd bedroom had 2 cots and a folded-up mattress on the floor. Not much, but the blankets were clean and warm. Caleb stepped in first, examining the space with cautious approval. "Can we stay here tonight?" he asked. Jesse looked at him carefully. "You can stay as long as you need." Noah walked over to the window and stared out at the darkening trees. "Does it get cold here?" he asked softly. Jesse nodded. "Sometimes. But we keep the fire going, and I've got an extra quilt or 2. Noah didn't smile, but his shoulders relaxed just slightly. Eli, meanwhile, was staring at a photo on the wall, Jesse and a young boy both smiling beside a fishing pole. "That your son?" he asked. Jesse froze. "Yes," he said. Finally. "That's Luke. He passed away. Few years back." None of the boys spoke, but Eli reached out and gently touched the edge of the photo, a quiet acknowledgement that said more than words. That night, Jesse made scrambled eggs and toast, the only dinner he could put together without a trip to the store. The boys ate slowly but cleaned their plates. Jesse noticed they passed the butter without needing to be told. Small things. Things that hinted at how long they'd taken care of each other. After dinner, he washed the dishes while the boys explored the living room, picking up books, peeking behind the couch, cushions, whispering. It was the first sound of childhood Jesse had heard in years. Before bed, Jesse lit the wood stove in their room and tucked an old Afghan over Noah's mattress. He lingered in the doorway longer than he meant to. Caleb was already curled under his blanket. Eli lay on his side with a book. And Noah was watching Jesse. "Do you read stories?" the boy asked. Jesse blinked. "I used to," he said. "To my son?" "Haven't in a long time." Noah nodded solemnly. "Maybe tomorrow. Maybe tomorrow." Jesse turned off the light. The house went quiet. Later, alone in his own room, Jesse sat on the edge of his bed, elbows on knees, staring at his calloused hands. He hadn't touched a Bible since the funeral. But tonight he found himself whispering. Not a prayer, just a thought sent into the dark. "I don't know why you brought them to me. I'm not good at this. I don't know what to give. But I'll show up. I'll be here. Every day." As he lay back, the wind rattled a loose shutter. He closed his eyes, and for the first time in 3 years, he didn't dream of loss. He dreamed of laughter in the next room. Morning came quietly. Jesse woke not to the sound of an alarm or bird song, but to the scent of wood smoke and the faintest shuffle of bare feet across the hall. For a moment he forgot. For a moment, he thought the house was empty again. Then he heard a whisper, followed by a soft laugh. He sat up slowly, blinking against the pale light slipping through the window blinds. Pulling on his boots, he stepped into the hallway. The boys were huddled in the kitchen, standing on a mismatched stack of wooden crates, trying to reach the top shelf of the pantry. Caleb looked over his shoulder. "We were trying to find pancake mix," he said. Matter of fact. "You said we could stay." Jesse rubbed the back of his neck. "I did. And I meant it. But next time you ask before climbing my whole house." Eli grinned. "We were careful." Jesse chuckled under his breath, opened the right cabinet, and pulled out a half-used box of mix. "I'll show you how it's done. Tomorrow you can try." Noah looked at him solemnly. "Even me, especially you." The stove hissed as Jesse poured batter into the hot pan. The kitchen filled with the sweet, simple scent of cooking flour and warmth. For the first time, the boys didn't sit in silence. They asked about Gracie, his mule, about the barn, about whether there were snakes in the woods. Jesse answered each question with a calm, measured tone, grateful for the noise, the curiosity, the life. They ate together at the table, the boys wolfing down pancakes like they hadn't eaten a real meal in weeks. Jesse watched them with quiet awe, not because they were perfect, but because they were still here, still trying. After breakfast, they all went outside. Gracie, as expected, made a dramatic display of disinterest in the boys, snorting and swishing her tail, then eventually trotting over to nudge Eli in the chest. The boy laughed, stroking the mule's coarse fur like it was silk. "She likes you," Jesse said. Eli beamed. Out in the yard, Jesse handed each of them small chores, helping him carry firewood scooping feed for the mule gathering kindling. They moved with surprising competence, understanding instructions without questions, and working together without complaint. That more than anything struck Jesse. These weren't kids who'd been coddled. They'd survived, learned to function in the cracks between what a child needs and what the world sometimes fails to give. After the chores were done, Jesse told them they could have the rest of the afternoon to themselves. Caleb wanted to explore the edge of the woods. Eli asked if he could borrow a book. Noah didn't ask anything. He simply sat on the porch steps with a notebook Jesse didn't remember handing him. By mid-afternoon, the house had settled into something Jesse hadn't felt in a long time: peace. When he returned from stacking logs by the shed, Eli was waiting for him by the screen door. "I wrote something," he said shyly, holding out a folded sheet of paper. Jesse took it, unsure what to expect. It wasn't long, just a few stanzas written in blocky, uneven letters. But the words: he doesn't smile, but he stays. He doesn't talk much, but he hears. He brings pancakes and makes the fire warm. He didn't leave. That's all we needed. Jesse didn't speak for a long time. Eli watched him fidgeting with his sleeves. "You don't have to like it," he said quickly. "I do," Jesse said. "I do more than like it." He folded the poem carefully, not stuffing it into a pocket or drawer, but tucking it into the pages of a book on the side table. A safe place. A place of memory. "You ever think about writing more?" Eli shrugged. "Sometimes. Mama used to write songs. I think it helps me think clearer." "You should keep doing it." "I will, if that's okay." Jesse gave a soft nod. "It's more than okay." That evening, Jesse cooked again, this time a pot of vegetable stew that filled the house with garlic and thyme. Caleb set the table. Eli folded napkins into careful triangles. Noah placed silverware in absolute silence, but his expression was no longer cautious. It was focused. After dinner, they sat on the porch. Jesse had thought about bringing out the guitar he hadn't touched in years. He didn't. Not yet. But the idea no longer filled him with grief. Instead, he brought out a second quilt. The nights were starting to chill. He wrapped it around Noah, who had again claimed the corner of the porch steps like a bird finding its perch. "Does this place always feel this quiet?" the boy asked. Jesse considered. It used to feel empty. But no, not quiet like this. Noah nodded. "It's a good quiet." "Yeah," Jesse said. "It is." And then, without meaning to, he found himself telling them about Luke, about fishing trips, about comic books and scraped knees, and the way Luke used to hum when he concentrated. The boys didn't interrupt. They didn't pity him. They just listened. Later, as the stars blinked awake overhead, Jesse tucked the boys in. Caleb whispered goodnight first. Eli followed with a simple, "Thanks." Noah said nothing, but Jesse found the drawing tucked under his pillow stick figures again. This time, 4 of them. One was tall with a beard. In blocky letters above their heads it read, "New Family." Jesse stood in the hallway long after the light was off, and for the second night in a row, he didn't feel alone. The library in Three Pines had never been more than a single room in the back of the town hall. 2 rows of donated bookshelves, a circulation desk that doubled as a lost and found, and a bulletin board held together by a prayer and too many thumbtacks. But to Evelyn Whitmore, it was sanctuary. She arrived 3 weeks ago, trading the buzz of a failed marriage in Charlotte for the stillness of a town where the most pressing news was whether rain would come before harvest. Her title was officially part-time librarian, but she had taken to her duties with the quiet fervor of someone trying to rebuild not just a life, but herself. She liked the stillness of the place, the way the air smelled of paper and time, the way kids, if they came at all, whispered out of instinct. She did not expect 3 boys to burst through the front door one Tuesday afternoon, like a breeze from another world. Caleb led the charge backpack, bouncing Eli close behind with a book under one arm. Noah trailed last, cautious but alert, his eyes scanning the room like a soldier entering enemy territory. "Afternoon," Evelyn said, looking up from the desk. First time here, Caleb nodded. Our new dad said we could check out books. Evelyn blinked. Your dad. His name's Jesse Maddox, Eli explained. But he's not really our dad. Not by blood. But it still counts. Evelyn's hand paused over her check-in ledger. Jesse Maddox. The name sent a quiet ripple through her thoughts. She remembered seeing him in town once or twice, tall, quiet, always a bit apart. She also remembered the whispers, the boy he lost, the silence that followed. Well, she said gently, You're very welcome here, all three of you. I'm Evelyn. The boys nodded in turn. Caleb went straight for the adventure shelf. Eli hovered near the poetry books. Noah stood in the center of the room, unmoving, staring at a faded painting on the wall, a cabin under snow. Evelyn walked around the desk, crouched slightly so her voice didn't travel far. That's a print by a local artist, she said. He painted it after the blizzard of '78. Says the snow brought everything to a stop. And that's when he finally heard himself think. Noah didn't respond, but his fingers brushed the frame. Evelyn didn't press. Children, she'd learned, often needed less noise and more space. An hour later, the boys each carried 2 books checked out under a new family card, with Jesse Maddox's name, written carefully in her neat script. They thanked her, awkward, but sincere. Then they left. And Evelyn stood for a long time behind the desk, watching the door long after it closed. The next day she saw Jesse. He stood at the town's small hardware store comparing bolts, with the quiet deliberation of a man who had rebuilt many things with his hands, if not his heart. She hesitated. Then she stepped closer. Hi, she said. He turned. His eyes were sharp, but not unkind. He took a second as if searching for her name. I'm Evelyn, she offered. From the library. Recognition sparked. Ah, yes. The boys were talking about you. That's usually a good sign, she smiled. Or at least, not a terrible one. He gave a faint chuckle. They came home arguing over which books to read first. It was new. Good new. The best kind. There was a pause. Not awkward, just unrushed. The kind that said both people were used to silence and didn't find it uncomfortable. Evelyn gestured toward his cart. Building something. Fixing. Barn door came off the hinges in last week's wind. The boys say it's haunted now. She laughed, a real one, soft and melodic. Jesse looked at her for just a moment longer than necessary, then looked away. Well, she said, stepping back. If you ever need more haunted stories, the library's fully stocked. Jesse nodded. Appreciate that. She left first, but he watched her go. That weekend, Evelyn found a folded piece of paper slipped into the book drop. No envelope, just a note written in shaky but determined handwriting. Miss Evelyn, thank you for the books. I liked the one about the boy who found a new home. I think that's what's happening to us. Eli, she read it 3 times, then tucked it inside her journal. The following Tuesday, Jesse returned. This time, he came alone. Evelyn glanced up, surprised but not startled. He held a worn paperback in his hand, something from the philosophy shelf well beyond the usual reach of his boys. I figured I ought to check out something for myself, he said. Led by example and all. You're the first person to touch that book in 6 years, she replied, scanning it. You may be reviving forgotten wisdom. He smiled, and this time it reached his eyes. They spoke for a few more minutes. About books, about the garden behind the library, about nothing and everything. When Jesse left, the bell above the door chimed once. Evelyn turned to the window and watched him walk away. And for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel like the only soul in town looking for a second chance. The wind that swept through 3 Pines that night didn't come quietly. It started as a whisper through the cottonwoods, then grew into a low, growling roar, rattling shutters, lifting porch mats, and throwing open barn doors, that had held fast for years. Jesse woke to the thump of wood against wood, followed by the unmistakable clatter of something crashing to the ground. By the time he pulled on his boots and grabbed a flashlight, the rain had started thin needles of it driven sideways by the wind. He found the barn door swinging on one hinge, slamming like a heartbeat gone wild. Inside, Gracie whinnied in alarm, her hooves clacking against the floorboards. Jesse stepped inside and soothed her with one hand, eyes adjusting to the flickering light. The storm had peeled back the top of the western wall, leaving the interior exposed. A feed bin had toppled, spilling oats across the floor. Tools were scattered. A shovel lay cracked in half. It would take days to repair. He sighed long and low, then turned as the beam of his flashlight caught movement at the barn door. 3 small silhouettes stood there, Caleb, Eli, and Noah, each in their pajamas, each holding some part of a blanket or jacket. Not one of them had shoes. "We heard it," Caleb said. "Can we help?" Jesse should have told them to go back to bed. Instead, he nodded. Together, they righted what they could. They gathered scattered tools, nailed boards back into place where possible, and finally, after 2 full hours in the wind and damp, Jesse rigged a temporary closure using rope and 2 cinder blocks. By the time they returned inside soaked and shivering, it was nearly dawn. Jesse set up towels near the stove. He brewed instant cocoa, passed out dry socks, and wrapped them in blankets like burritos. Noah looked up at him, eyes heavy. "We're gonna stay, right?" Jesse paused, then knelt before them. "Yeah," he said. "You're gonna stay." The next morning was still gray, but calmer. Jesse set the boys to lighter chores, sweeping, fetching nails, stacking small logs, while he made a list of repairs. He needed hinges, plywood, a new shovel, and an extra pair of hands. He hated asking for help, but the barn wouldn't hold much longer in its current state. So he drove to town. The hardware store was half empty when he arrived, save for the usual retirees browsing screws like they were cigars. Jesse nodded to them politely and began gathering what he needed. At the counter, he was met by a slow drawl. "You fixing what that wind tried to take?" He looked up. Virgil Kane stood there, older and thinner than Jesse remembered, but unmistakable, leaning on the counter, like it might be the only thing holding him up. "I heard about the storm," Virgil added, voice gravelly but steady. "Saw the boys yesterday. They looked taller." Jesse measured his words. "They're doing okay. That's 'cause of you." "No," Jesse said quietly. "That's 'cause they're stronger than anyone ever gave them credit for." Virgil looked down, fidgeted with a penny, then cleared his throat. "I've been working clean," he said, voice almost a whisper. 34 days. Ain't much. But I'm counting." Jesse didn't say anything. Virgil continued. "I can swing a hammer. Still got my old tools. If you need help with the barn." It hung there fragile as the morning mist. Jesse looked him in the eye, and for a long moment said nothing. Then slowly, deliberately, he gave a single nod. "I'll pick you up at 7. That evening, Virgil arrived wearing a work shirt too big for his frame and gloves that had seen better decades. The boys stood on the porch watching him with a strange mixture of caution and curiosity. Virgil offered a tentative wave. None of them waved back. But neither did they hide. Jesse handed Virgil a toolbox and gestured toward the barn. They worked side by side in silence for hours. Virgil didn't talk much, but he moved with practiced ease, measuring twice, cutting once, driving each nail with care. Jesse watched him out of the corner of his eye, noting the tremble in his hands when he wasn't holding something. At one point, Eli came outside with water for them. He stood 5 feet from Virgil, silent. "I liked your poem," Virgil said, eyes still on the nail he was driving. Eli blinked. "How did you see it?" "I didn't. Jesse told me about it." "Oh." Virgil paused, wiped his brow. "I didn't do right by y'all. But I see you now, and I'm proud." He didn't wait for a response. He didn't expect one. But Eli placed the cup on the workbench a little closer than he had to. By sundown, the barn stood whole again, reinforced, ready for the next storm. Jesse and Virgil stood outside looking at it in the golden light. "Thanks," Jesse said. Virgil nodded. "Don't thank me. Thank whoever gave me the second chance." Jesse turned to him. "Maybe it was the same person who gave me mine." The box was at the back of the closet under an old winter coat and a blanket that still smelled faintly of lavender. Jesse hadn't touched it in years, not since Evelyn, his late wife, passed, and their son Luke not long after. But that morning, while searching for a missing boot of Noah's, he'd stumbled across it again. It was cedarwood, smoothed by time, the hinges creaky but still strong. On the lid, a single word was carved by hand in his wife's careful script: "Someday." He carried it out to the living room like it was made of glass. The boys were outside gathering kindling for the stove, their laughter floating faintly through the window, Eli's higher-pitched, Caleb's confident. Noah's quiet but steady. Jesse sat down, slowly laid the box on the table and opened it. Inside were letters, dozens of them, some folded neatly, some half-written, some just single sentences on scraps of paper, all in Evelyn's handwriting. At the top of the stack was one marked with a paperclip, "For when you're ready." He unfolded it with trembling fingers. "Jesse, I don't know if I'll ever get to read these with you. Maybe I'm being dramatic. Maybe I'll beat this. But I've always liked writing more than talking. It's where I find the words I don't know how to say out loud. So if you're reading this, I hope it's because you're still here, still trying, still loving even if it hurts." He stopped reading. Then he read the whole thing again. He didn't cry, not then. But something moved inside him, something that hadn't stirred in a long time. That evening he brought the box to the porch, where the boys were roasting marshmallows over a small fire pit made from an old tire rim and some river stones. They turned toward him curious. "I found something today," he said, setting the box down. Noah moved first, then the others, gathering around as Jesse opened the lid. "These are letters your mom wrote," he said. "Not your mom by blood. Mine. But she believed in keeping words for hard days." He handed one to each of them. "You don't have to read them now," he added. "But I thought, maybe it's time someone else read her heart." They sat together, the fire crackling the pages, rustling like soft rain. No one spoke for a while. Then Caleb said, "This one says she wanted to build a treehouse." Jesse nodded. "We never did. I didn't know how to build one, and then we ran out of time." "I could learn," Caleb said. "I bet we all could." Eli tapped his paper. She wrote that she believed in second chances, that everyone should get one. Jesse looked at him. She did believe that. Noah didn't say anything, but he leaned his head against Jesse's shoulder, holding a letter so tightly the edges wrinkled. Later, when they were ready to go in, Jesse folded the letters back into the box, but slower this time, like laying someone down to rest, not putting something away. He left the box on the shelf by the fireplace, not hidden anymore. The next few days felt different, lighter somehow. The boys began asking about Evelyn, what she liked, how she laughed, what music she listened to. Jesse told stories he hadn't told in years, about the time she burned a pie and laughed so hard she cried, about how she used to tap her foot to country songs, offbeat but joyful. They wrote her letters too, each boy taking time one afternoon to scribble notes and fold them carefully. They placed them in the box beside hers. It became a ritual, a kind of unspoken bridge between grief and grace. On Friday, a package arrived. Evelyn, the living. Evelyn, the librarian, had heard the boys talking about their new treehouse plan. She'd gathered a stack of architecture books, kid-friendly woodworking guides, and a vintage copy of The Giving Tree with a handwritten note. Every strong structure begins with a good story. Inside the front cover she'd written, "For Caleb, Eli, and Noah, because stories like people grow stronger when we build them together." Jesse read it 3 times. That evening he brought her fresh eggs and a jar of honey from the backyard hive he hadn't touched in years. She invited him to sit on the library's back bench beneath a maple tree, just beginning to turn gold. "You look different," she said softly. "I feel different. I'm glad." He paused. "They're changing me, Evelyn. Those boys. I thought I was saving them, but truth is, they're saving me." Evelyn reached over and for the first time touched his hand. No one said it couldn't be both. That night, Jesse dreamed of a treehouse, not made of wood, but of words. Letters patched together, building a place where no one had to be alone again. And when he woke, he smiled, because for the first time in years, he was ready to build something that lasted. Autumn arrived in slow breaths. Mornings turned crisp. The porch boards creaked under heavier boots. Smoke lingered longer in the chimney air, and the boys began wearing flannel shirts too big for them. Sleeves rolled up like miniature farmers. The rhythm of the Maddox household had settled into something almost sacred. Shared chores, mealtimes by the wood stove, and nightly readings from a rotating stack of books Jesse checked out from the library. It was quiet, steady, and healing. But it was Eli who stirred something new one Saturday morning. They'd just returned from the farmer's market, where Jesse sold honey in small mason jars and traded eggs for firewood. As the boys helped unload the truck, Eli stood holding a worn patch of fabric in his hands, a scrap of an old flannel shirt Jesse hadn't worn in years. "I want to make something," Eli said. Jesse looked at the scrap. Out of that, Eli nodded. "A quilt." Jesse raised an eyebrow. "You know how to sew." "Nope," Eli said, grinning. "But Evelyn does." The next afternoon, Evelyn arrived at the cabin with a basket of needles, colored thread, a folding table, and 3 yards of backing fabric patterned with pine cones and deer. The boys hovered like bees, eager and restless, while Jesse moved furniture to make space by the hearth. Evelyn laughed softly. "This reminds me of when my grandmother used to quilt. She always said quilts were a way to remember, without having to carry everything in your arms." She placed the fabric scrap Eli had found in the center of the table. "Let's start with this," she said. Each boy began to gather pieces from the house. Caleb brought in a square cut from one of Noah's old t-shirts, the one with a faded rocket ship. Noah contributed part of the pillowcase he had arrived with, stitched with small blue stars. Eli added a page from his journal, a short poem written in black ink, carefully traced onto muslin. Even Jesse, after some hesitation, found an old bandana he used to carry while working the fields with Luke. It still held the smell of summer sweat and sunlight. He didn't say anything as he laid it on the table, but Evelyn met his eyes and nodded. No words needed. They worked into the evening, pinning, stitching, cutting. The boys fumbled with needles, pricked fingers, laughed through mistakes. Jesse sewed in silence his stitches, crooked but sincere. Evelyn guided gently, her presence like a soft song in the background. As the quilt began to take shape, so did something else, a deeper truth. Each patch told a story, not just of the boys' pasts, but of their place now in this home, with this man under this roof. The quilt wasn't just warm, it was proof. 2 nights later, it was finished. They stood around the table, the firelight dancing across the threads. Jesse lifted it with both hands, as if unsure something so fragile could hold so much. Caleb broke the silence. "Can we put it on the couch?" Eli shook his head. "No. It should go in the living room, on the wall." Noah, in his quiet voice, said, "It's home. That settled it." They hung it above the fireplace just under Evelyn's framed library note, and next to the shelf that now held the cedar box of letters. Jesse stared at it a long time. "I've lived here most of my life," he said, finally. "But this is the first time it feels full." Evelyn touched his arm. "That's what belonging does. It fills the empty rooms." A few days later, Evelyn returned to the library to find a new poem slipped between two returned books. "We stitched a map not for roads, but for hearts. It doesn't tell where we've been, just where we're safe to rest." Eli Maddox. She smiled at the name. It was the first time any of the boys had used Jesse's last name. She kept that poem just like the first tucked into her journal. That night, she invited Jesse to dinner. They sat on her back porch, a single candle flickering between them, stew steaming in handmade bowls. The boys were at home already in bed. The conversation was soft. Memories, small laughter, quiet silences. Then Evelyn leaned in. "Jesse," she said gently, "I hope you know. You're not just building a life for them. You're building one for yourself again, too." He didn't answer right away. Then, almost in a whisper, he said, "I don't wake up angry anymore." Evelyn reached across the table, laced her fingers into his. Neither of them let go. The next day, Jesse took the boys into town for photos, an idea Evelyn had planted the week before. They stood in front of the old cotton gin dressed in their best clothes. The photographer, a local with a dusty tripod, snapped a few frames. Before they left, Jesse asked for one more shot. He stood with the boys, each with one hand resting on the quilt, now folded neatly over Jesse's arm. That photo would later hang in the town library under a small brass plaque that read, "Family stitched not by blood, but by love." For a long time, Jesse Maddox had been a quiet fixture in Three Pines there, but not quite seen. People had whispered about his grief, nodded politely at his presence, but mostly let him be. That suited him just fine. But everything changed when he showed up to the fall harvest market with 3 boys, a basket of honey jars, and a patched quilt slung over his shoulder like a banner. It was Evelyn's idea. Let people see what second chances look like. At first, Jesse hesitated. He wasn't one for spectacle. But Evelyn had simply smiled, kissed his cheek, and said, "It's not about you. It's about what you've built." So he went, the town square ringed by old storefronts and booths overflowing with pumpkins, candles, apple cider, and handmade soaps had never looked more alive. People bustled from stall to stall, laughing, sipping warm drinks, catching up on town gossip. When Jesse and the boys arrived, it felt like time paused, not because anyone stared with suspicion, but because they stared with recognition. The triplets, once huddled and silent, now ran to set up their little stand. Caleb arranged honey jars with precision. Eli pulled out a framed poem he'd written about bees and stuck it in front with a hand-drawn sign, "Our bees, our honey, our home." Noah stood behind the table, steady and watchful, a quiet pride in his stance. And Jesse, he stood tall beside them, arms crossed gently, like a man not guarding, but holding. People came slowly at first. A teacher bought a jar, then the mailman, then the church secretary. Before long, there was a small line. Eli read his poem aloud to a cluster of elderly women. Caleb offered to help someone carry her pumpkins to her truck. Noah handed out samples of cornbread made with honey, earning wide eyes and a rare smile from the usually stern mayor's wife. Word spread quickly. By midday, they had sold out of every jar. Evelyn arrived near the end, wearing her green cardigan and carrying a cloth bag full of donated books. "I told you," she whispered as she stood beside Jesse. People were ready to believe in something again. Jesse looked around, the nods from strangers, the high fives to his sons, the way the townspeople weren't whispering anymore, but calling them by name. "I think I was too," he said quietly. A week later, Evelyn organized a community storytelling night at the library, a tradition that had faded years ago. She resurrected it with flyers, handwritten invites, and a promise of homemade pies. The boys begged Jesse to let them go. He didn't need convincing. The library was full that night, neighbors packed in tight, some standing along the walls. A microphone sat near the fireplace, a string of warm lights glowing overhead. A table in the back overflowed with cookies and pie slices and mugs of cider. Caleb went first. He told a story about Gracie, their stubborn mule, who he swore understood English and had tried to stage a protest when they forgot to feed her carrots. Laughter erupted. Then Eli stepped up and read a new poem. We were once a question. Now we're an answer not perfect, but stitched in hope. The applause was long and loud. Noah didn't speak, but he brought up a picture, a drawing of their cabin with smoke curling from the chimney and 4 stick figures on the porch. The smallest figure, slightly apart from the rest, was holding a heart. Beneath it, he had written one word, healing. Jesse hadn't planned to speak, but Evelyn nudged him, eyes warm and waiting. He stood clearing his throat. I used to think quiet was peace, he began, but it was really just absence, silence after loss. He looked at the boys seated side by side, leaning into one another like saplings grown close. These 3, he said, they didn't save me from anything dramatic. No miracles, no thunder from the heavens. They just showed up. Every morning, every bedtime. They asked questions, needed breakfast, needed to be held. And by showing up for them. His voice broke for a moment. I remembered how to show up for myself. Evelyn stepped forward and took his hand. And in that moment, under library lights, surrounded by neighbors who no longer looked away, Three Pines changed, not with fireworks, but with trust rebuilt thread by thread. After the event, the town's newspaper ran a column titled, "Stitched, in Hope, the Family That Quietly Mended Us." Jesse never read it aloud, but he clipped it out and folded it into the cedar box at home between 2 of Evelyn's old letters. The quilt remained on their wall, but now people in town began asking quietly, curiously, how to make their own. The wind was sharp that November morning, cutting clean through coats and denim, carrying the scent of wood smoke and brittle leaves. Jesse stood at the end of the gravel road, one hand on the steering wheel, the other holding a brown paper bag filled with soup in mason jars, bread, and a jar of honey. Noah's idea. Across the parking lot stood a squat, pale-bricked building, Hollow Creek Care Home. It had once been a Catholic girls' school, then a veterans' housing facility. Now it housed men like Virgil Kane, too tired, too sick, too forgotten to be anywhere else. Jesse hadn't planned to come that day, but when Noah quietly said over breakfast, "I think he might be lonely," Jesse nodded without hesitation. Noah never asked for things without reason. And so, here he was. The woman at the front desk, gray-haired with a voice like gravel softened by sugar, led Jesse down the long hall with the slow shuffle of someone used to time moving in small pieces. "He has good days, and rough ones," she said. "But he always perks up when your name's on the sign-in sheet." Jesse said nothing, but something inside him tightened. They stopped at room 208. She knocked gently and opened the door. Virgil sat propped up in a recliner wrapped in a fleece blanket, a book open in his lap, but unread. His frame had thinned further, his skin papery and pale, but his eyes, those were sharp when they met Jesse's. "Didn't expect you," Virgil rasped. "But I'm damn glad." Jesse stepped inside, placed the bag on the side table. "I brought soup," he said. "Still can't cook, huh?" Jesse smiled. "Lucky for you, Evelyn can." Virgil chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. That woman could soften a stone. There was a long silence, not uncomfortable, just weathered. Virgil leaned his head back against the chair. They still talk about me in town. Jesse sat across from him. Not the way you think. Virgil blinked. How's that? They remember the barn, the help, the fact that you showed up when it mattered. Virgil's lip twitched. One good deed doesn't buy back a childhood. No, Jesse agreed. But it can start a new story. Virgil's hands trembled. He folded them together, then looked out the window. You know, he said slowly, I used to pray back when I believed that someone would come take those boys. But not like I left them. I wanted it to be clean, gentle, not public, not shameful. Jesse's voice was quiet, but it mattered. That you stood there, that you told the truth. Virgil shook his head, eyes misting. I was a coward. Jesse leaned forward. You were broken. There's a difference. Another silence. Then almost in a whisper. Do they hate me? Jesse let that question sit for a while. Then he stood, pulled a folded envelope from his coat pocket. They don't write much, but they asked me to bring this. He handed Virgil the letter. Virgil hesitated. His fingers shook as he unfolded it. Inside, in 3 different handwriting styles, were 3 sentences. We don't hate you. We hope you're okay. We remember the feather carving. Virgil clutched the paper like a lifeline. His shoulders shook, and for the first time in Jesse's presence, he wept openly, not from shame, but from release. I kept it, he whispered. The carving. I still have it. Jesse nodded. They'll want to see it one day. That evening back at the cabin, Jesse told the boys about the visit. He didn't soften the truth, but he didn't sharpen it either. He's tired, Jesse said. But he was glad. Caleb frowned. Does he have anyone just us for now? Eli stood and went to the shelf. He took the cedar box and pulled out a folded napkin, then unwrapped something carefully, the second carving Virgil had made. One he had given Eli the day of the barn repair, a tiny wooden tree. I think he needs this back, Eli said. Noah, seated at the table, looked up. Can we go next time? Jesse met their eyes. He'd never asked them to forgive, had never once told them to feel anything but what was true. But they had made their own choice. And it was mercy. 2 weeks later, the 3 boys stood in room 208, hands tucked in their coat pockets. Virgil sat up straighter than usual, hair combed, wearing a flannel shirt that Jesse had brought him. Noah approached first and handed him the wooden tree. Eli placed a new poem on the side table. Caleb just stood tall and said, Thanks for trying. And in that moment, between the pain of the past and the grace of the present, a broken man became whole again. Not because the damage was erased, but because someone had looked at him and said, You're still worth something. Snow had fallen early that year. It came soft and slow, blanketing the woods, the pasture and the roof of Jesse's old cabin, in a hush so complete, it felt like the world was holding its breath. Inside the house glowed with warmth. The fireplace crackled steadily, the scent of cinnamon and pine lingering from the garland Evelyn and the boys had made the week before. Jesse sat in his favorite armchair quilt over his lap, a mug of coffee going cold beside him. He held a letter, an official one, with a return address stamped NASA. He'd already read it 3 times. And still, he couldn't quite believe it. Caleb was the first to speak when the family gathered that morning. Dad, he said, grinning like the 7-year-old he once was. We're taking you to town. To town, Jesse raised an eyebrow. Eli stepped forward. To the library, actually. Evelyn's planning something. You're required. Jesse gave them a look. You've never had to drag me to a library. Noah spoke, last eyes bright. This time's different. At the library, Jesse found the main reading room transformed. String lights hung between shelves. Folding chairs formed rows. The old community lectern stood at the front beside a table with photographs, images of the boys from years past, their first day at school, the first beehive harvest, the quilt-raising day. At the center sat the most recent photo, the one taken at the fall market, with the boys standing proudly beside Jesse, the quilt folded between them. Evelyn met him near the back row, pressing a gentle hand to his arm. "You've always been the quiet kind," she said. "But today, it's our turn to speak." He glanced around, unsure. "What is this, a thank you?" She smiled. "And something more." The event began with Evelyn stepping to the lectern, clearing her throat softly. "I've lived in many towns," she said, "but I've never seen a story like this one. It didn't happen overnight. It didn't come with headlines. It came in the form of consistency, of a man who didn't run when it got hard, a man who made pancakes, who stitched a quilt, who learned to love 3 boys who weren't his, but became his in every way that matters." There wasn't a dry eye in the room. Then came Eli reading a new poem, longer than usual, more composed. He gave when he didn't have much. He stayed when it would have been easier to leave. He didn't teach us to be perfect. He taught us to be kind. When Eli stepped down, Caleb took the lectern. He held up the NASA letter. "I was just accepted into the Future Engineers Mentorship Program," he said. "It's because of Dad. Not because he built rockets, but because he taught me that showing up matters more than being the smartest person in the room." Applause swelled. Then Noah stepped forward carrying a handmade wooden box. "I've started a center in the next town over," he said quietly. "It's called the Second Chance Place, for kids like us, for adults like him." He opened the box and took out a folded quilt, patterned with symbols, representing healing growth and community. In the center, 4 stitched names: Caleb, Eli, Noah, Jesse. "I made this one for him." Jesse stood motionless as Noah approached, gently draping the quilt over his shoulders. "It's our turn to keep you warm," Noah whispered. Later, after the speeches, the hugs, the cider, and pie, Jesse and Evelyn walked together through the quiet, snow-covered street toward home. Her arm was tucked into his. The stars blinked down through the frozen dark. "I'm not used to all the attention," Jesse murmured. Evelyn smiled. "You don't have to be. You just have to accept it." "I used to think I was done," he said softly, "that life had passed me by." "You weren't done," she said. "You were waiting." They reached the porch. Jesse turned to her, brushing a snowflake from her collar. "I've been thinking," he said. "About you. About us." She raised an eyebrow. "Oh, about how you've been here every step of the way, helping the boys, helping me." He hesitated. Would you consider staying? Not just in town, but here, with us?" Evelyn didn't speak right away. Instead, she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small box. Inside was a key. "I had this made a week ago," she said, "just in case you ever asked." Jesse stared at it. "You always did like to be prepared," he said, voice low. "And you," she replied. "Always. Take the long road to the front porch." They laughed, soft, full steady. He leaned in, kissed her under the lantern glow, snow falling slow and silent around them. Back inside, the boys were waiting. Noah was at the piano. Caleb sat cross-legged on the floor sketching. Eli was curled near the fireplace with a book of poems. And Jesse, still wearing the quilt across his shoulders, stood in the center of it all. Not as a man who had rescued 3 children, but as a man who had been rescued by them. A man finally made whole. Years passed, the way snow melts in the sun, gradually, almost imperceptibly, until one day you look back and realize a whole season has slipped through your hands. The cabin had changed. There was a new deck built by Caleb with Noah's help. A small glass greenhouse sat behind the barn. The kitchen had been redone, the old wood stove replaced by something more modern, though Jesse still used the fire on especially cold nights. He said it smelled like memory. The quilt still hung above the fireplace. Its edges had faded, its fabric worn, but it remained the way truth always does, even when the color begins to fade. Jesse had grown older, of course. His back ached more in the mornings, his hair now mostly silver. But his spirit, as Evelyn often told him, had never stood straighter. They'd been married for 4 years. She never moved in all at once. Her books came first, then her plants, then her quiet humming in the kitchen, and suddenly Jesse realized she'd been there all along. He had just needed to make space for Joy to stay. One summer afternoon, the family gathered beneath the old cottonwood tree behind the house. Caleb, now 24, had returned from a NASA fellowship, his backpack still dusty from the road. Eli arrived with a published book of poetry under one arm and a notebook under the other. Noah brought stories from his second residential center. 2 new buildings added dozens of kids enrolled. They sat at the long table Jesse had built by hand. There were bees in the garden, wind in the grass, and laughter in the air. "You should tell them," Evelyn whispered to Jesse as she passed him a pitcher of lemonade. He gave her a look. "You sure they're your boys? You tell them." Jesse cleared his throat. "I've decided to retire the honey stand." Caleb's brows lifted. "Really, I'll keep a few hives," Jesse said. "But I'm not chasing jars around the county anymore," Fair Eli said. "You've earned the rest." "I'm not stopping everything," Jesse added. "I'm thinking about teaching woodworking down at the community hall. Maybe even writing a little." "Writing?" Noah asked, grinning. Evelyn smiled. "He's been scribbling in the mornings when he thinks no one's looking." Jesse shrugged. "Sometimes a man's got things to say after all." They laughed. But there was a softness to the moment, a realization shared between them. Life had not only been rebuilt, it had become rich, generous, full. That evening, Jesse sat on the porch, with Evelyn, a blanket over their knees, 2 mugs of chamomile tea warming their hands. From inside came the sound of piano keys, Noah playing a lullaby he'd written. It drifted out through the open window, mingling with the rustle of cottonwood leaves and the chirp of early crickets. "You ever wonder," Jesse said quietly, "what would have happened if I hadn't stepped onto that platform?" Evelyn leaned her head on his shoulder. "Every good story begins with a step someone almost didn't take." He nodded. "Sometimes I think maybe Luke was the one who sent them. Not in a mystical way. Just maybe love finds a way to keep moving forward." Evelyn didn't reply right away. Then she said, "I think the world hands us broken pieces, and sometimes, if we're brave, we pick them up anyway." They sat in silence for a while, listening. At one point, Eli came outside with a box under his arm. He handed it to Jesse with a grin. "We've been working on this," he said. "It's not much, but it's ours." Jesse opened the box. Inside was a photo album hand-bound. On the cover, the Maddox family, stitched in hope. He turned the pages slowly. The boys at the library, at school, at the market, on the porch, building the treehouse, visiting Virgil. There were letters taped beside photos, short notes from kids at Noah's centers saying, "Thank you." A poem from Eli, hand-lettered in the back. "This is the place where nothing was expected, but everything was given. Where hands that once held loss now hold each other." Jesse closed the album, his throat too tight to speak. Caleb, seated beside him, said softly, "We wouldn't be who we are without you, Dad." Noah added, "You didn't just take us in, you grew us." Eli smiled. "And we're still growing." Later, after the stars had scattered across the velvet sky and the boys had gone inside, Jesse and Evelyn stayed on the porch a little longer. "Do you remember what you said the day you asked me to stay?" she asked. "I said you'd already been here the whole time." "No," she said, nudging him. "You said you didn't have much, but what you had, you were willing to share." Jesse chuckled. Still true. She turned to him. "You were wrong about one thing, though." "What's that?" "You've always had everything that matters." He looked at her eyes full of quiet, tender knowing. and for one last moment that night, Jesse Maddox looked out at the land he'd once thought too empty, the house he'd once thought too quiet, the life he'd once thought too broken, and he felt it all come whole. Not because he had fixed everything, but because he had chosen to keep showing up. And that's the story of how one man's quiet choice to show up, to stay to believe, became the miracle that changed not just 3 young lives, but his own. If this story touched your heart, we'd love to hear from you. Tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? It's a beautiful thing knowing these stories are reaching kind souls across the globe. And if you'd like to hear more true-to-life stories filled with kindness, healing, and second chances, feel free to subscribe. No pressure. Just know you're always welcome here. From the bottom of our hearts, thank you for spending this time with us. We don't take it lightly. Until next time, take care, stay warm, and never underestimate the power of quiet love.